Hello, hi everyone. Welcome to the channel. My name is Satyam, and in today's session, we are going to create a Amazon EKS cluster, that is Elastic Kubernetes Service. We are going to create EKS cluster with the help of graphical user mode, that is called as GUI. However, you can create the EKS cluster using command line tool that is called as EKS So EKS is a command line utility by using which you can create a Kubernetes cluster. So it's a command line utility for creating EKS cluster as well. So we are going to use console or you can say graphical user mode, graphical user interface to create the cluster. So we can create this. Now, coming to Amazon EKS, the very first point that need to be taken into consideration is that Amazon EKS is a managed Kubernetes cluster. It's a managed Kubernetes cluster. Now, we need to understand what is managed Kubernetes cluster, by the way. So if you see a Kubernetes cluster architecture diagram, what we observe that a Kubernetes cluster is similar looking like this. So we will draw a Kubernetes cluster architecture diagram. We'll point some of the main component. So this is the, you can understand, this is the VPC of my account, and I am going to create this cluster in Mumbai region. So select that AP-South-1. Now, I am going to create my cluster in this particular network, and the very most important component of the cluster is control plane. So we'll have a control plane. So control plane and control plane. Control plane is basically the heart of Kubernetes cluster, which does a lot of critical functions. If we talk about the component of control plane, we have first component is called as Kube API server. Then we have Kube scheduler, that is the another component, Kube scheduler. All these components have their own work. Then we have etcd, that is a DB, and we have another component that is called as controller. So on a high level, control plane consists of Kube API server, Kube scheduler, etcd, and controller. Now in a Kubernetes cluster, you can have minimum one worker node, or you can have more than one worker nodes. Okay, so in this diagram, what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to create a two worker node. So worker node 1, this can be worker node, and worker node 2. So worker node will have certain component which are basically container runtime. So container runtime, then these have kube proxy, and then another important component is called as kubelet. So these are the three major important component which lies in the worker node. Now, why I'm showing this Kubernetes architecture diagram, and in this Kubernetes architecture diagram, what I'm trying to show you here is that the control plane, we are talking about managed Kubernetes cluster. So in a managed Kubernetes cluster, the entire control plane will be managed by AWS. So AWS is going to manage my control plane. So that is what the managed Kubernetes cluster is. So in your organization, in your production system, you will find managed clusters. Sometimes we will find that we have managed clusters, and sometimes we have unmanaged or non-managed Kubernetes cluster, you can say. So what are the example of managed clusters and what are the example of non-managed Kubernetes cluster? If we talk, so non-managed Kubernetes cluster, so the cluster which are created using kops, or the clusters which are created using KubeADM, there are certain and what are the example of managed Kubernetes cluster? So Amazon EKS is an example of managed Kubernetes cluster. Then you have something called as Azure EKS, Azure Kubernetes Service, and similarly GCP offer also that Google Kubernetes Engine GKE. So these are the example of managed Kubernetes cluster where control plane will be managed by whom? The control plane will be managed by the service provider or cloud provider. So control plane will be managed by cloud provider. Okay. So in today's demo, we are going to create a Amazon Kubernetes cluster using console method. Let's go and try to see how we can create a Amazon Kubernetes cluster, guys. Okay, the very first thing that we will do is we'll go to the AWS platform, and this is the standard documentation of Amazon EKS. You can go through the same what Amazon EKS is. Okay. So in order to create the Kubernetes cluster, what we need to do is we need to come to the landing page. You can search for EKS service in the search bar, and this search will help you to come on this particular page. So this is the service using which I can create a managed Kubernetes cluster on AWS platform. So first what you need to do is add cluster, click on add cluster, click on create button. You need to type the name of your cluster in case whatever name you want to give. So here I want to give the name as Satyam Kubernetes cluster. So this is the name of my cluster. Let's suppose I have given prod. So I am going to create a Kubernetes cluster for production use case. Now, if I'm creating a cluster, what will be the version of my cluster? So as you know, the latest version of Kubernetes is 1.22. However, the default version is 1.21 set over here. We have the option to choose 1.20, 1.19. People who are using their cluster at 1.19, they need to upgrade their cluster from 1.19 to 1.20 or 1.21. So as of now, we are creating this cluster with the 1.21. In future, we'll show you how to upgrade this cluster accordingly. Now, in order to create the Kubernetes cluster, we need a kind of role. We need a IAM role. So we have to create a IAM role. For creating a IAM role, we need to go to AWS platform. Again, we have to open a service, and the name of the service is called as IAM. So we have to go to this particular service, which is an identity access management service. This particular service is responsible for creating users and manage their permissions. Now we have to go on roles, and we have to click on roles. So as you can see that I have couple of roles in my account, but for creating a Kubernetes cluster, you have to create a role. So first, the things that I will be doing over here is I will be navigating to I will be scrolling down, and I will be choosing the common use case, that is EC2. I will be choosing common use case over here. I will be choosing here this. Now use case for this, I have to go and I have to select for EKS. EKS is Elastic Kubernetes Service. So select this option, and you have to select the second option, that is EKS cluster. And what this will do is allow access to other AWS services that are required for operating cluster managed by EKS. So once the EKS cluster will be up and running, once the cluster creation will be in progress, then Amazon will be connecting with some other services like network, storage. That's why we need this particular role. Now click on the next, and then go to this particular policy. So we have to select this particular policy, that is Amazon EKS cluster policy, and we have to click on next. Now we have to pass the role name. So let me verify Amazon EKS cluster policy, that is correct. So what is the role name that I want to give? So you can give the role name like this. So you can use your cluster name, and in front of that you can put role, which says that this is the role which is used by this particular cluster. Now click on create role. So we will have the role getting created. It will take around 20 seconds to get created, and now you can see the role has been created, and I can search my role in this particular list. So now you can see this is the role that I have created. So it is a role which has a policy document attached. This is the policy document, and if you want to see the JSON view of the policy document, this is the policy document. Okay, So now go to Amazon EKS page and then refresh this particular drop down button, and what you will see that the role that you have created is visible now. So I am going to select this particular role. This role will be useful for creating the cluster. Now I will click on next button, and I am going to create the Kubernetes cluster in the default subnet of the default VPC, and I am going to use a security group and I have other security groups with me, and I am going to select a security group which has which has open traffic across the globe. And in this particular option, I am choosing IPv4. So as you know that Amazon EKS offers you to have your cluster working at IPv4 as well IPv6, but for simplicity purpose, we will be selecting IPv4. Now, this is a very important endpoint. This is very important topic which says cluster endpoint access. So once you have your cluster ready, how you want to access your cluster? So if you click on public, it means the cluster will be accessible to across the globe. The people can access your cluster any point in time from anywhere if they have valid kubeconfig file with them. If you can do private, then none of the people can access from outside. Outside people will not able to access. The good practice is to make cluster private in for your production use case, but for demo, we are going to use public. So the cluster endpoint is accessible from outside of your VPC. Working node traffic will leave your VPC to connect to endpoint. So you have to select this particular public option. Now, this is something called as VPC CNI, Container Network Interface. So we'll let it the default. This is the core DNS version, and this is the kube proxy version. So these are a default. By default, you can let them as it is. Click on the next. Then these are the logging. So if you want certain logging to be enabled, however, these are chargeable. So when you enable this logging, what will happen? The cluster will collect those logs and store those logs in CloudWatch. Okay, so we can let them as it is. Click on next. So now what we are going to do, we are at the review page of this. We have provided all sort of details for creating the cluster, and then we gonna click on create cluster. So click on create cluster. What it will do, it will take around 5 minutes of time to get the cluster up and running. Okay, so what you can see as of now, what you will see, you have to go and you have to click on overview of this particular, you can of this cluster. You can see the cluster is basically in the creating state. So you have to wait for around 5 minutes in order to get the cluster up and running. So I'm checking the status of the cluster. The cluster is still creating state. So we have to wait some time till the time I am pausing the video. Let's wait for 2 minutes and then we'll come back. So guys, the cluster is still in creating state. Now I will show you how to connect to your cluster, how to connect your cluster using from Windows. So you must be using Windows operating system on your system. So what you can do is you can use Windows to connect to this Kubernetes cluster. So this is the command prompt. I have opened command prompt. Let me open the command prompt again, and I will show you how exactly you can connect to this particular cluster. So open command prompt in your system, and you need to have a tool that is called as kubectl. You need to have a tool that is called kubectl installed on your system. If it is not there, you need to install that particular tool. So as you can see, kubectl tool is installed on my system, but I will tell you the steps how to install this particular tool. So you can do Google that install kubectl on Windows. So it will take you to Kubernetes page, and this is a very simple step. What you need to do is, so you need to download this particular kubectl.exe using this particular link. And once you download this, and then simply you have to type kubectl version client. So I have already done it. but this is the step. I will add this step in the documentation of this in the description box. So I have this kubectl installed in this my system. So according to this diagram, if you see, I want to connect to this cluster. Okay, so I want to connect to this cluster, and how can I connect to this cluster? I can connect this cluster using a Windows laptop. So imagine this is my laptop, and I have a tool. So I have a tool that is called as kubectl. So using this tool, I am going to connect to this Kubernetes cluster. Okay, so let me try to do so as well. So all right, so there are two prerequisites that need to be met. So you need to have kubectl installed on your Windows system, and if your Windows system don't have AWS CLI installed, then you can install AWS CLI as well. So AWS CLI installation of Windows is also simple. I will mention the steps in the document in the description if you don't have. So you need to install AWS CLI in order to run AWS command from the system. Okay. So guys, I have both the things available in my system. So let me show you. So I have AWS CLI as well. I have AWS installed in my system. AWS CLI is installed in my system, and I have kubectl as well. So I have both the prerequisite. Now I need to configure the credentials. I need to configure the credentials for connecting to the Kubernetes cluster. So where I will connect, where I will find the Kubernetes credential. So you have to connect to the Kubernetes cluster with the user with which you are creating this cluster. So it is very, very important. Otherwise you will not able to connect to your cluster. So I am using the user ID Satyam to create this particular cluster, which is basically the root user of this particular account. So I am using root user to create this Kubernetes cluster. So I need root user access key and secret access key to I need access key and secret access key of the root user to connect to this particular cluster. So I am taking my root user access key. And how can you configure this? Using AWS configure command. So you have to use AWS configure command. So once you do AWS configure, it will ask for your access key. So you have to provide the user with which you are creating the cluster. In my case, I am creating this cluster with the help of root user. So I am giving the root user credential. But for a security concern, you don't need to create your cluster with the root user. Don't create your cluster with the root user. You can do it for demo purpose, but you have to make sure your access key and secret access key should be safe and sound. So once I will do this demo, then I am going to delete my access key and secret access key for this root user. So you need to hit enter, and then you have to specify the region name, which region you want to work with. So I want to work with AP-South-1, which is the Mumbai region, and then give the JSON format. So enter. So what I have done is I have configured root user access key and secret access key so that I can connect to the. All right, in order to connect to your Kubernetes cluster, you need to have your AWS CLI installed, and you can verify AWS CLI by running any AWS command. So here I am simply running AWS configure command, AWS configure list. So once you do this particular command, it verifies that AWS is installed. You can work with AWS command, and you need to have kubectl installed on your remote system from where you want to connect to this Kubernetes cluster. And now let's get connect to the cluster. For connecting this cluster, you need to update, you need to run this particular command. The command is AWS EKS update kubeconfig. You have to provide the name of the cluster, and you have to provide the region in which the cluster is. So once you copy this particular command and once you run this particular command, then what will happen is the kubeconfig file of this cluster will be added to your context. So what is the output here? Added a new context for my cluster to this particular user. See user satyam.kubeconfig config. If you go to this particular path, user satyam kubeconfig, what you will find? You will find that there is a file. So this is the location. If you go, and this is the config file which has been generated once I executed the command. You can open this particular file with the help of notepad++, and what you will observe that this particular file will have the address of your kube API server. So it will have the address of your Kubernetes cluster, and this is the URL. This is basically the address of your Kubernetes cluster. So how my local system knows where the Kubernetes cluster is? With the help of kubeconfig file. So guys, I now it's time to connect to the server, and now it's time to check. I am connecting to the server. I have connected to the server. Now I am going to run some certain command like kubectl get nodes. So let's suppose I am going to run this particular command. So kubectl get node you can run. No resource found. It says no resource found. Let's run some other command like kubectl get namespace. So click on kubectl get namespace. It will show you all the namespaces that has been created by default, and now you can see that how many pods are running. So kubectl get pod -a, if you do so, it is going to list you all the pods on your cluster. So now all these pods are running inside the kube system, and all those are in pending state. Okay, these are in pending state. So now let's go to the dashboard, and now you can see that this is the cluster, and in this cluster we have created the cluster, but we need to add the worker nodes. So as of now there are no worker node available in this cluster, so we need to add the worker node. Go to the resource section, go to the configuration section, and here you will see that uh, in the compute section you will have option of adding node groups. So you can add a node groups. So click on add a node group, and you have to give name like worker nodes. Okay, and you need to create another role. Now again you need to create a role. For that you need to go to IAM service. Let's go to IAM service and create a role for worker nodes. So now we are going to create a role for worker nodes. So go to the roles, click on create role, and click on create role, and then select on EC2 because worker nodes are going to be EC2, so we have to select EC2. Click on the next button, and here you have to add certain types of policy document for worker nodes. So there are three policy documents which need to be in place. That is Amazon EKS CNI policy. You have to add this policy. You have to search this policy first and then add this policy. So I am going to add first policy, that is Amazon EKS CNI policy. The second policy document that I am going to use is Amazon EKS worker node policy. Search this one as well. So you will get this policy. So search like this, you will get Amazon EKS worker node policy. And the third policy that I'm going to attach here is this one, Amazon EC2 container registry read only policy document. So these are the policy documents that are provided by AWS, or you can say these are managed policy document. If you see, it is like AWS managed. So these are the policy documents which are provided by AWS, and we are using this policy document to create our worker nodes. So this is the name of the cluster. So we can copy the name of the cluster, and we can give the role name similar so that it will be easy. So worker node roles. Okay, let's give like this. So this is the role, and this role is going to have three policy documents. And why we are creating this role? We are creating this role to attach this role to our worker node pool. So let's create this role. Once this role is created, so it will take a while and it will create the role. So fail to create a role already exists, it says. So let remove this and click on worker node and create a role. Click on create a role. So we'll use this name. So Satyam Kubernetes cluster hyphen worker node is the name of the role that we have to use, guys. Okay, so this is the role that we have. So if you remember, we have created second role. First role we have created for worker control plane. So these are the two roles that we have created. Just check the valid policy documents are assigned to it or not. So these are there. Now go to AKS. So select this role, click on this particular button, it will load the latest role, and you can see that the role is Satyam Kubernetes worker node is there. Now you can use launch template. You can use launch template if you have. So configure, if you have any launch template, then you can use it, otherwise let it be. Now there are Kubernetes tents. The node group does not have any tents. These options we can configure in upcoming sessions. Let it be as of now. Click on next. Now this is the AMI which is going to be used as worker node. Capacity is on demand and we are going to keep the cost minimum. So we are going to select a t2.micro. So t2.micro, let me see whether t2.micro is supported or not. So t2.micro is going to be coming with one virtual CP and 1 GB of memory, and it is going to take 20 GB of disk size. You can perform cluster auto scaling from here. Minimum size is 2, maximum size is 2, and desired sizes is 2. Let these options by default it as of now. Click on the next. This is the subnet of the security group. This is the subnet in which the worker node is going to be get created. Click on the next, and then what you can do here is click on create. So what it will do, it is going to create a pool of worker node. It will create two worker nodes because we have given the minimum size 2, and it will create the worker nodes and then it will be shown. So in the first part we have created the cluster, and in the second part we have added the compute node, or you can say worker nodes, to this particular cluster. So this is called as node group. So this is creating state, and we can validate from command line. We can go here and we can put like kubectl get nodes. So you might have seen that when I have run this particular command kubectl get node, it shows no resource found. It means that time we don't have any worker node. And as you know, this is a managed Kubernetes cluster, so worker node will be managed, control plane will be managed by Kubernetes itself. So kubectl get nodes, you can put a watch against this particular command. Watch what will do. Watch will show you, sorry, it is not recognized. So this particular command kubectl get node will show me the update kubectl get node. So what I'm doing is I'm running this particular command, and after a while what you can see that both the nodes are visible. So you have to wait a while to have the node up and running. So till the time, what we can do, we can pause the recording and we can connect once the node will be visible. All right guys, what you can see that now kubectl get node command is giving me output. It is giving me one system which says not ready. It will take a while because it has been only 6 seconds to have this worker node coming online. There will be one more worker node is going to come. So initially the status of this worker node will be not ready state, and subsequently the cluster will go from not ready to ready state. So this is the status. The cluster is going to get created. So the cluster is both the nodes, one of the node is in ready condition and another node is not ready condition, but now both the nodes has been turned into ready conditions. So now you have your Kubernetes cluster created. These are the namespaces that get created by default, and the one very most important namespace where all the control plane component run is kube system. So if you want to see the pods in kube system, kubectl get pods -n, and then you have to do kube system. So once you click like this, it will list all the pods in those namespaces. So what you can see that kubeproxy, kubedns and AWS nodes both are running, and as you know we have this managed Kubernetes cluster created. Now what we can do, we can perform some testing. Once we have our cluster created, what we can do is we can create some namespace. Kubectl create a namespace nsprod. So let's suppose this is the namespace we can create, and we can deploy one application on this particular namespace. So for deploying application, you can use you can either use imperative method or declarative method. I am creating a pod. Let's suppose kubectl run my pod is the name, and then hyphen image I am using, and image I am using from, let's suppose, Nginx, and hyphen namespace that I am going to use is prod. So this is a imperative method. This is the imperative method to create a pod in a particular namespace. Once you do this, what will happen? Kubectl will use kubeconfig file and will connect to the Kubernetes cluster and will create a pod in prod namespace. So kubectl get pod -n prod. If you do so, what you can see that you have a pod getting created in this namespace, and this pod is using Nginx as an image. You can describe this pod if you want to. Kubectl describe a pod, give the pod like my pod -n and then prod. So you can describe the pod like this, and it will give you a lot of details how the pod has been created and all. So that's it from here, guys. Thank you for watching this. This is how you can create a managed Kubernetes cluster on AWS EKS. Okay, so three things has to be taken care. Few things that need to be taken care, that you need to create two roles. So you have to create two roles. Okay, so you have to create two roles in IAM. So one is basically for cluster or control plane. You can say you have to create one role for control plane, and then you have to create one role for worker node. So you have to attach one policy document over here, AWS managed policy document, and you have to attach 3 policy documents to this. The system from which you are trying to connect to the cluster, let's suppose if it is a Windows system, you need to have kubectl and AWS CLI installed, and you need to configure access key and secret access key of the user from which you have created the cluster. So in case if you have created the cluster using root user, you have to configure the access key and secret access key of the user using AWS configure command. So when you run AWS configure command, it will ask for the access key, it will ask for secret access key, and then it will ask for the region, and then the default output format, which is JSON. Once you're done with this, hit. So I will provide all the steps in the description. Thanks for watching. Thank you. Till next video.